Hi, everyone, and welcome to Latinx Rising. I'm Robert.
And I'm Dasnet, and together we are passionate about exploring issues surrounding systems of oppression, racism, and colorism. These are stories that should be told by the people on the ground, working every day to make life better.
So, I was talking to Dasnet a couple days ago or yesterday, and I said that there's this guy that I know that I really think we should talk to. So, when I talked to her about your education, your background, what you do, what you know, she became very, very excited. So, Don, I'd like to ask you, if possible, or if you feel uncomfortable, I'll do it, for your CV, because your CV is really interesting as far as where you got your BA, your master's, and the quantitative analysis that you did.
Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, I got a Bachelor of Science in Public Relations at the University of Florida, which was actually the number 3 school in the nation for it at the time. Then I had always had an interest in politics. My grandfather had been chair of the county commission here in Leon County in Tallahassee. And so I grew up around it. I wanted to go on to school. So I went to Georgia State in Atlanta, where I got a Master of Arts in political communication. And what I did with my uh, thesis was actually way back in 1996, an analysis of the quality of political information available through the internet compared to traditional media, specifically newspapers. And it was basically looking at the burgeoning shift in media and what was going to come, and we now see as a tsunami because it's Twitter now, it's Snapchat, it's Facebook, it's Google. All of these, when I started, none of these things existed. But what we were already seeing at that time predicted in a way where this is where we are now.
And you're talking about less than 20 years ago, is that correct? Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, yeah, no, less than 20 years ago. Although,
Speed of communication and technology went
It's
so
incredible.
rapidly. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's so interesting. 1996, you're talking about the quality of communication, which is basically such a hot topic. It's on everybody's minds. You were sort of on the precipice of that forefront, almost getting ahead of that conversation. That's really interesting.
yes, actually, as I was saying, I had to look at the history of it and backing up a little bit. This really started in 1980 in terms of changing things. A congressman by the name of Barney Frank, who's now left, he was the first openly gay member of Congress, but he was also from the Boston area. And while it has nothing to do with him being gay, what he actually did was he was the first to harness segmented marketing. It used to be that we had 3 networks: ABC, CBS, and NBC. And when you advertised in a broadcast network medium,
Right.
and you had to hit the whole Boston area. But he only represented a portion of Boston. And he noticed that this new thing at the time, cable, would be able to sell advertising segmented only in certain suburbs of Boston. So he actually got more bang for his buck because he was everyone used to advertise for people they didn't really need to reach. And that was the first big switch to segmented advertising. At the same time, the cable news network had started right about that time, CNN. And so we were beginning to see some shifts in the way that it used to be we all got our news from one of 3 networks, and those networks all basically gave everyone the same information. They only
Right.
changed 1 or 2 stories for the whole thing. So that's really the history, but it begins to break, and during the Reagan era, it shifts pretty dramatically, and members of Congress begin to realize we can target our messages to more direct groups. Fast forward a lot, you see ongoing media segmentation through that period. And I was speaking with Robert just a little bit ago. One of the things that happened in even traditional media before we get to the internet is the Miami Herald split into 2 papers. They
Okay.
created an English version and a Spanish version. And it was El Nuevo Herald. They were trying to capitalize on a large Spanish speaking market that didn't want to digest its information in English. And they successfully did it for a while.
Mhm.
What they realized, and this was part of the segmentation, they realized that the Spanish-speaking public was different than the Spanish-speaking born English-speaking public. There were people, and they really wanted to target that group in their native tongue with their native culture. So they specifically hired an entirely different group of reporters and even photographers. So while they could work within it, and they developed their own style, their own speaking. I actually met a reporter who was covering it. He had explained to me the Elian Gonzalez controversy that had happened right after the millennium. What had happened was Elian Gonzalez was a refugee that had actually washed up on the shores near Key Biscayne, and he had become during the Clinton administration, a big controversy, because what had happened was Cuba wanted the boy to go back, and he had family here, distant family in the Miami area, but what they didn't want him to go back. And part of it became a proxy struggle between the United States and Cuba. And what happened with this segmented media is the Spanish language media presented the story from the perspective of the Cuban diaspora, the Cubans living here. You know, we want Cuba to be free, no more Castro. And Castro and the English-speaking media presented the story in a way that was more palatable to broader America, and they understood it that way. The basic distinction between the two of why, because he had a father back in Cuba, and the question was, does he stay with his distant relatives in America or return to his father in Cuba? Now, the distinction was the Cuban Americans didn't want to return him because they perceived him as being returned to the government of Cuba as a piece of property.
Correct.
Because the communist government perceives its citizens as an asset, a property. And so they were like, you're not returning a child to his father, you're returning property to a government. And that's wrong because he won't be free. That was that perspective. In the English-speaking versions, they were presenting where the American government is refusing to return a child to his father who is alive. And it really was tearing the entire city apart, much like what we see now nationally in a Democrat Republican. We're seeing entirely different stories. We're seeing entirely different media talking to segmented groups that are not talking to each other. They're mostly shouting to each other.
Yeah.
So that's what happened then. Ultimately, when the Clinton administration sent Elian back, because that's where the majority was with it, it was like literally ripping the child from the Cuban family, and it was a horrific, demoralizing experience for them. It was like literally ripping the child from the Cuban family, and it was a horrific, demoralizing experience for them. Part of that, well, any Cuban that actually managed to get onto the soil was allowed to stay. So he was legally able to.
But he was a minor.
Yeah, and much like what we're seeing today in the broader context, we have a media that had built up an entire world where it was inconceivable to return him. And everyone they knew and everything they read and everything they heard, because we had segmented radio as well back then, it was just nuts to even contemplate sending him back. The rest of the country was in, what is wrong with you people? And that's really where I think we are, is we cannot conceive of the other person's point of view.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. So the broader American audience that you're speaking to was really resonating with the story of this little boy who was separated from his father, and the natural return. They're not understanding the from the other side, on the other side of the aisle, so to speak, that there is this Cuban property, Cuban issue, what foot, dry foot, that there's all these things entangled. They're resonating with a little boy who lost his mother, who should be returned and reunited with his father.
But it's not only resonating. See, what I'm explaining to you now, I remember the period. I had no idea until 10 years later. I had never heard the returning property to a government argument. I had never heard it.
The first time
And
I'm hearing it is from you now. I've never heard that term.
And so so in this thing, it did not exist. And that's what I'm saying is the segmented media has begun to split. And what we saw in Miami and that tearing apart of the community was half of the community had no idea about half of the argument because it was never presented to them. It was never a part of the argument. I'm sure it was probably mentioned ever so briefly and quickly dismissed. That's one of the roles that the media actually play as gatekeepers. And that's been one of the challenges and criticisms is, well, you don't give us the whole story. You just give us the stuff you think's important. And that's really where the distinction has come along is new media has now jumped way ahead of that. And this is where we see Facebook and Twitter, particularly, they're the dominating ones right now. There is no filter. There is no editor. There is no somebody deciding who's going to be on this program, deciding what's going to make print and what we're all going to be talking about. So topics can take off like a wildfire, and you can actually change the conversation. Whereas going back to 1980, the conversation was controlled by three men who headed up one of three networks, and they all pretty much agreed, and they all operated within a few blocks of each other in New York City. That was the world that was more or less dictated to us. Now we see anyone can create a media outlet and something can take off. And that was going well. What we're also seeing now that gets a little more complicated and where Donald Trump was more successful. What I had looked at in 1996 is there was an attempt to put information out there. And the struggling marginal candidates were very effective at getting their raw footage out there, but it wasn't taking off. And people weren't really chomping on it. And the powers that be and the usual politics of it, everybody decided to take a very narrow road. We're not going to risk anything. We're not going to say anything all that edgy. And so they didn't go with a direct appeal to the people because they didn't want to offend people. And that's what happened. Donald Trump comes on the scene and he's not at all stoked in any of that history, any of that experience. And this is how he chewed through every one of his Republican opponents at the time, is he was not going to play nuts. He was going to say things that were going to be inflammatory and exciting. And while everybody says we'd love to talk like that, how we really feel, he was the first one to take the major risk, and it was a huge risk. I'm going to say stuff that I know people like, but everybody says the polls, I'm going to offend too many people and I'm never going to make it. He did. Because the fact that he was so out there was so incredibly refreshing to a lot of people.
Right.
Finally, he's speaking. We all know this now. He's speaking to us in a way that no one else will. And he attracted people he wouldn't have normally. It's to some degree appearing to be backfiring now. But what you see is now we can't really put the genie back in the bottle. Because now we find what happened in 2016 was so much more explosive, and we're still trying to wrap our heads around what happened. The amount of segmentation, the fact that Facebook can actually carve people up by where they live, what color they are, what age they are, but what they're liking. Mm-hmm. You might be 50 years old and liking the Kardashians. Or you might be 50 years old and sharing everything from NPR. That tells me a lot about what kind of 50-year-old I'm looking at. Yes. We were not able to do that before. Think about when I started this in 1980, all we could do was broadcast to everybody in about 10 suburbs. That was as segmented as we could get. Now we're able to chop people up by how we think.
I'm just trying to piece this together too, because there's a lot to take away there. But I'm thinking of this world where there's three networks, and you're trying to cast one message you don't want to offend anybody because it's hitting all of these people. So on some level, it has to stay level because it's, you don't know who you're talking to and you can offend somebody. So it has to stay kind of even keel. But now my media that I'm creating, when I'm typing something into Google, they know who I am. They know how old I am. They know the news I like to read. They know the think pieces that I share. They know what will not offend me when something is advertised to me in a certain way. So it's curated and it's targeted. So you're saying that there is an impact on that because, like, do you think there's a correlation between that curation of them knowing who I am and not being able to offend me versus, like, has that affected the message?
Yes, because what has happened now is they're creating multiple messages. If we're going to broadcast this, but we go off camera and I say something, I know I'm only talking to the two of you, so I might talk a little differently. What we can actually do now with the media is we can slice, just like that had happened in the Elion situation. We're only going to talk to the people reading the Spanish version of the Herald.
Right.
And we're pretty sure they're not going to ever get what's in the English version, and vice versa. So I'm going to say one thing here and a different thing here. Same me, different messages, because I know I'm talking to different people. The ability that we've been able to slice and dice and micro market has become staggering. And that is precisely what is happening. So while we talk about Fox News as sort of an example of, well, the conservative ego or blogosphere or media ecosystem, this small segment, they're really a massive segment. We're able to get we can look for Cubans that kind of like Trump, and Cubans that rabidly love Trump, and Cubans that hate Trump. And we can even break it down in even smaller groups based on age and give each of them different kinds of messages. And that's precisely what's going on, which brings us, my main point is, after the election, regardless of how it goes, even if it's a tsunami for Biden, which is what people are expecting, these forces are still going to be in play.
Correct.
These forces are still going to be there. So when we talk about how divided we are, and this is precisely what the mainstream media is finding over and over, people really cannot understand why on earth people are voting for the other guy. And they genuinely mean it, because in their world, the information that they're given is so radically different.
Correct.
That they cannot see the other side has never been presented to them. Now, we're self-selecting away. We all do that. We pick our own favorite TV shows, whether we like scary movies or thrillers or comedies. And so we self-select away from what appeals to us. But this is now happening on a civic level, which is not what anyone predicted.
Right.
And probably the most dangerous thing I think comes out of it really isn't Trump himself. It's what Trump has actually taught all of the other politicians.
Correct.
Because everybody gets into it, they genuinely do, wanting the best. I believe that. Yes, there's egos involved in being a politician, but having grown up with them and having met a lot of them personally, they genuinely do. But they find out very quickly it is very hard, and you're probably not going to be successful for long at all, taking a very high road about it.
Well, not a question. You gave me an analogy recently that I thought was great, and I'd like you to share it. It's about the gas can and what Trump did to communications.
Oh gosh, yeah. Specifically with his Twitter, he's burned down all of the filters, and he has absolutely destroyed the structure of being okay. And specifically, I mean that in relation to the candidates. If you think back to when he was just in the primary and he'd yet to win the nomination, what had happened to him was he saw an opening because there were a whole bunch of people who were only about this much apart. It was just a tiny sliver apart. And he broke away from the pack dramatically because he burned down the conventions of what was okay and not okay to say.
He took a gas can and he just burned everything down.
He burned all of it down and literally destroyed all of his opponents because he was willing to say things that they were not willing to say. And that really goes to the segmented media thing. And so there's just, for fear of alienating people, he took a huge risk, and he found that really playing hard to one group against another group pays off tremendously. And all of those conventions, and this is where we're talking about a least common denominator. To a lesser degree, you see Bernie Sanders doing this. Now, he doesn't do it in an inflammatory way. That's not really his style. But he is very effective at getting a narrow slice super excited because he's willing to say and go in hard for what would normally be risky positions.
Right. And this is some of the frustrations that people have with the Democrat Party. There's the infighting in the Democrat Party because there is nobody who is a Trump, so to speak, who's willing to gas can and go to that level.
Yes, but what I think we're going to see going forward are going to be, there's going to be more of this. You know, long after Joe Biden, Trump, Hillary, they're all in our rearview mirror. And we're talking about them like we were talking about the Reagan era and the Clinton era then. It's going to be so far in the rearview mirror. New people we don't even know of are going to grab these opportunities. And that's really the question is it going to be used to separate us further? And that really is where I think we're going to have a more challenging time.
I can't fathom what you just said. That separated even further.
No,
Wow.
I think it's just like our representatives actually showing what the country already is, so to speak, because we already are segmented. We already are so divided. And it's just having that representation materializing in our representatives.
But Don is putting it in such a way that makes so much sense that like my person, one of the questions I was going to ask him, I'm going to jump ahead of myself here, was, you know, where are we headed? Where are we going to be headed with this in your opinion? But I'm starting to see things in a very different light. And I'm starting to see that, and this word has been used a lot lately, we're at an inflection point in this country, period. Either we move or we die. The Republic either moves or dies, because it's almost like nobody out there gives a shit, pardon the expression, about the United States of America anymore. It's almost like we're not empire anymore. We're not, they really don't care what's happening in our election, because we don't tend to match anybody else's systems in the world.
I think what they care in the way that you care about the Kardashians.
But you know, but it ties back to what you said, that, you know, what is our future going to do with these new tools that they have? Are they going to unite us or separate us? Because what I see is our country has to change from this antiquated capitalistic system that obviously isn't working right now to what? I don't know. But
well, you know, if you look at it, forgive me, I'll step back in an extremely macro view. We're seeing these exact same stories and dramas playing out all over Europe, but it's not having the same effect. And what is the major difference? While there's nothing constitutional about it, we're a two-party system.
right.
And you see throughout Europe, it's a multi-party system. Now, there were certain things that they built into the system that strongly favor a two-party system. But that would actually allow, if there was more of a coalition government or a multi-party system that actually worked, but because of the way we elect our president, which is different as opposed to prime ministers, it would still kind of come down to the two-party system strongly favors that, to reduce the choice down to one of two. But what we're looking at is our society is becoming much more segmented and their reality. So the multi-party system actually can handle democracy and such diversity of view. And so they're not experiencing the same stress on the system that we are experiencing.
You're talking about multi versus binary, which is what we have right now.
Precisely. And, whether you're looking at a liberal or conservative point of view, the liberals sort of gleefully are going, the Republican Party is destroying itself. And to some extent, that is true. Many Republicans are actually saying this. We're appealing more fervently to a smaller and smaller segment. Still a big chunk, but it's only about 30% are rapidly thrilled with where they're going. That's not a long-term strategy for a two-party system. It is for a multi-party system. So what's going to happen is they're going to have to either change and appeal more broadly, or something else is going to happen. And I honestly don't know what. I'm not advocating multi-party system, but the fact is we have a lot of very segmented groups that are powerful and loud all over the spectrum that are tearing at the direction we're going.
I have a couple of questions. My first was
I have never seen her this quiet, by the way. You are blowing her mind.
I'm one, actually not true. I just don't want to interrupt. I have a lot of questions, and now it's kind of where the rapid fire is going to start coming. So hold on one second. First, I want to, you said something about Europe, and that really resonated with me because you're right. Right? This sort of nationalistic populism is not just happening here. It is happening everywhere. This is not, France went through it, Brexit experienced it. There is this sort of division. I read an article, can't source it right now, that said, and I would like your opinion on this, that said that maybe some of the division, in addition to not having a multi-party system, is because those countries do not have the diversity that we do. While they have differences politically, they don't have other. Here, we have a constant state of other, right? For white Americans who are racist, we have Black Americans that we scapegoat as other. They're the problem. Whereas in somewhere like Norway, everyone is Norwegian. Like everybody looks like each other. They have the same facial features. They don't struggle with what I would consider the American reckoning of like the Jim Crow laws and the racial issues that we have, and that division is what divides us further, because we also have a racial problem, and that plays into a big part of our voting as well. And maybe this dream that we created, that we could be this melting pot and we can come together unified and oversee our differences, that is a pipe dream. That is no longer the case. It's
a great question. It's a great question.
It is actually, and you see some of the dynamics, or at least I see some of the dynamics in Europe are playing out here in a similar way. Yes, you have a tremendously white homogenous group in Europe. When you travel in Europe, you see the level of diversity, frankly, that you see in the American South. There just is this 85% white population and 15% Black. In Europe, they might be Muslim, they might be African, they might be from any number of areas that are not lily white. But the European experience. Now, that's different when you go to cities like London, Paris. To a lesser extent, I've been in Amsterdam. Yes, you do see some non-white, non-European descent, but not as much. And when you go to the countryside, it's virtually non-existent, much like you would see in the American heartland. If you go to Nebraska,
right.
Illinois, as long as you're not in a big city, you will not see a non-white person, just on your full stop. If it's heavily farm areas, you may see some of the Mexican immigrants, but usually, sadly, when it's harvest time, there's not that many Mexicans that have settled there.
And I guess
But
that's
there
sort
are.
of what I'm saying is that let's say, kind of theory, hypothetical, would the Republican Party or that small segment of voters that we were talking about earlier, is there a name we could put to them? I don't know. What is the name of the Trump supporters? The traditional your MAGA supporter. Would they be against universal health care if it was only for them?
Oh no! See, that's a wonderful thing. I think I had shared with you guys. I've lived the last 20 years in Miami, and I moved back to my home in Tallahassee, Florida, which is very sort of deep south. It's a liberal college town, but very deep south. And being back here and talking with them, they see the issue. They don't see it as a racial issue. And the question you have here is, and they're totally for universal health care. They love these ideas. They would actually like something like a Medicare for all. They're a little wary if they're on the conservative side. But the classic example is we see in the cities racism. Here's how they would explain it if they were actually able to do it. It says, since the 1960s, we've done so much for Black people. We've given them affirmative action. We've propped it up with a welfare state. We've given preferences to get into college. It's been 60 years. And they look around and they point of examples. Granted, there's been tremendous progress, but they look at slums. They look at crime. And they see it and they go, after all we've done, how much more do you want us to do?
But that's completely unfair.
I've heard that so many times.
It is the original sin. And also there's the
wait, let him make his point, because we're both going to kill him.
The point
I'm too quiet. Now I'm too loud. Listen. I'm speaking. Go ahead, Doc. I'm sorry.
Going back to the Elian example,
mm-hmm.
This is not a fair characterization, but this is what they see. And it is reinforced by the media that they're getting. And they're not getting counter arguments. They're not getting points that are there. What has happened over the last 20 plus years is they've been getting reinforced with that segmented stuff, not the counter arguments.
Right.
And they have been reinforced by even more so. So when they look at these things, we're not having a conversation. Here's an excellent one. Black lives matter, all lives matter. We can have a conversation about how incredibly unfair it is that Black people are actually being killed by police at an alarming rate. And even if you factored in, because I've looked this up, even if you factor in the rate of crime in the Black community is higher. I believe they're targeted more, so they have a higher crime rate. But even if you factor that in, they're actually dying by police encounters at a higher rate, even if you factor in the higher crime rate.
Correct.
So it's there. However, the conversation that would completely shift it is, why are the police killing this many people, period? And that's really something that would resonate. But by having the conversation along racial lines, it then comes back to another question. And what comes to the people in the conservative is a head roll of, oh my gosh, we have to do more for them.
Right.
Haven't we done enough? And this gets reinforced in their segment, and it further splits us. But this is precisely where things are actually, where we are not coming together, and where the media is actually, and the segment of media is turning us against each other. Because I think the Elian story would have been very different. And I think the Black Lives Matter story would be very different if it was a question of utterly ridiculous police brutality. But because of the fact that it's being framed in the way it is, and frankly, I don't blame Black people, I would too. They're being targeted, full stop. But we're actually creating right on the fault line so that we can't have a discussion.
Right, you're talking about
people dying.
you're talking about communication and how to get through to the person who's the ones we talk about that are never going to listen to you. They're always going to vote for Trump. It doesn't matter what you say. How do you reframe the conversation? And I think that's important. I'm not siding with anybody. I just think it's important.
I'm just going to jump in here really quickly. The thing is, I think we are also at an inflection point with Black Lives Matter, where the same way that maybe the, let's say, MAGA supporters are saying, oh my God, more, we haven't done enough, where Black Lives Matter is, how is this still happening? Why is this still happening? We've been quiet, we've been moderate, we've tried to reach across the aisle, we've tried to have these calm conversations, and we're no more. So now, how do you communicate? Like, how I couldn't, in good conscience, communicate to somebody in the Black Lives Matter movement. We need to have these conversations and reframe it in a way that is palatable to the other side to actually make change.
I'm not altogether sure that's it. And, your viewers probably would think, gosh, they brought in a borderline white supremacist for today. That's not me at all.
Oh, no.
I actually, and I want to say this, I actually believe that it is the right that wants to have the conversation along black lines. This is why the conversation won't switch. And remember how I said the lowest common denominator? No. They don't want liberals to start talking about all lives matter. They're thrilled. They think that we fell for a trap.
Wow.
Because you can carve out their segment and say that divide and conquer. That is precisely how. If you actually look at, when you were talking about why does not healthcare in some version appeal tremendously to working class whites, it does. But you have to say, okay, socialism got tied, starting with Reagan in the 80s, and government intervention. It was a dog whistle of free stuff for black people. And that's really what it was. We want to cut the welfare state. The welfare state continued to keep getting morphed into socialism broadly. And so every time we talk about I'm against socialism, what the vast majority of Republicans are hearing is no more free rides for lazy black people.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're hearing.
And so when we're not talking about specifically healthcare, all you have to do is throw a socialist label on it, and we don't want to discuss it. If you actually look now, when we talk about segments, when you talk about one of the ways that we cleave people, you have college-educated voters and non-college educated voters. Mm-hmm. What essentially happens with a college education is you're taught analytical skills with a 4-year degree.
Right.
And what you find is those who complete a 4-year degree and those who don't decide things on a much more rational analytical scale for college graduates and more of an emotional gut feeling scale for those who do not. So they decide things very quickly, and labels help them decide it on an emotional scale. Mm-hmm. That is precisely what they've been appealing to all this time. And once again, it goes back to the segmenting things. If I can say this in a way that creates an emotional response that makes you averse to something that you really want, but I don't want you to want, that's what's actually happening. And that's why I think that this will continue. The only major thing that they have is the two-party system may push things to a level to which the Republicans will not be able to successfully win elections, except in smaller and smaller niche markets.
To the emotional, not the intellectual.
Well, and that's really what they're actually using. And if you see the way the polls are going in this current race, you are finding that women are peeling off more and more. And you're also seeing that college-educated people are peeling off more and more from the Republican Party. And it's because of the fact that the appeal that they've been having is much more emotional. If you look at...
Effective.
Yes. And while people it must be the tax breaks. People are peeling off more and more so because they're beginning to see that this is not benefiting them, or they don't want to be a part of this. And so, and it is their analytical skills that are leading to that. And, gosh, at the risk of getting, women do tend to analyze more than men.
Yes.
Men make decisions much more quickly. Maybe that's a more effective decision-making process, but women actually, maybe not. They ponder things a bit more.
Making process.
There you go. So what you have, but that
Is
is
that
precisely in the appeal. The appeal is emotional. That's why you see even women without college educations are peeling off at a tremendous level, because they are more analytical. They are less gut level. Once again, that's yet another stereotype, but there is a segment of the population once you carve them up into these pieces. So that's what the politicians are actually doing, is they're looking at this micro targeting. I do not think that the President Trump is actually able to do that. I don't think that he has really hit on a nerve, and he's going to play that nerve over and over and over. As a result, people are peeling away from him.
I think you're right. And I think I'm going to go track back to what you said earlier, that you said somebody, either Don or it was Robert, who said the end of the Republican Party now with Trump. Like, this has fundamentally changed the Republican Party. And I just want to take a little bit back into history, that I also think this started when Obama won the election in 2008. The Republican Party did a study to the segments of this population to see why did they lose, and which groups, in the same vein, did they saw they lost Latino voters. They saw they lost, Black voters. They were losing women, and they did, like a summary report saying, in order for the survival of the Republican Party, we need to become more open to issues on immigration, because we need to appeal to Latino voters. We need to become a little bit more open on social matters, because we're losing women voters. And they digested this information in this research, and that was what was represented to the caucus, was this plan. And I want to say it was Eric Cantor actually believed in this very, very firmly. But then you see this transition. Obama now he loses the midterms, the House, right? He tremendous loss, and it's the Tea Party that now comes in, and this establishment that had this plan to sort of change the Republican Party in a different way is now sort of being overtaken by this Tea Party, like you said, that's appealing to this emotional, vocal group. And then this just starts to go more and more. So when John McCain and Sarah Palin vote, I think Sarah Palin really is the one who amped up that emotional appeal. She made such a big change. She was, I don't know if this is derogatory, she had that folksy, I'm going to say what I want, or, she was like, I don't read the New York Times. What is that? And then there was this anger because SNL was playing over and over and over again, making fun of these voters, making fun of the fact that they don't have a college degree, and making fun of Sarah Palin, where then all of a sudden their emotions are raised, and they're putting these Tea Party members into Congress. And then you have Trump, to the point that where there's any establishment Republicans left, that agenda, that way of thinking is now gone. They have lost complete control of being able to change the Republican Party in that way. That emotional appeal is now the party. We've seen it where establishment Republicans, they know that even though they might feel differently, this is an extreme example that would not have happened, but John McCain is an establishment Republican, where if he were, when he was alive, when he would want to vote a certain way, he couldn't just digest what is the traditional Republican Party, what's going to move us forward. It's what's going to not anger the base, that emotional base, what's not going to anger Trump's base, because we can't lose Trump's base. And they all vote in line. There's not one. And that's what they did. They filibustered over and over and over again. And I don't see that changing in any way.
No, but one of the dynamics that I think you're seeing with that is, in a two-party system, a party can be wildly successful for a long time. and it eventually runs out of ideas, and it simply says more of what I did. And so if you actually look at the period in which the Democratic Party winds down with Carter, and then there is a shift in Congress, because the Republicans had been in the wilderness since pretty much the Great Depression. So there was a huge 50-year period in which Democrats were largely in power. And that was, you look at that. What happened in the end was essentially we need a new tax and a new program to solve the problem. And Reagan came in and said, that's not the way to go. Now we've gone 40 years. And we're running out of things to deregulate and running out of taxes to cut. But that is the basic premise that they agree upon. And so parties do run out of ideas and appeals. And that's one of the things that we're finding now. I think this is a natural progression in the two-party system of being successful, so to speak.
I would agree with you. And I would say that culmination was very obvious in the presidential debate. What did you think of that?
Oh, well, that presidential debate's like none other I've ever seen. There was just a lot of shouting and babbling. But yes, that's one of the things that came out of the report that you were talking about, and the fact that there is no platform this year, which is also part of the debate. There's really not anything to say. All of the ideas aren't really going so well, and that is one of the natural things that does happen over time. I mean, Republicans have been taught to hate government. That's not a good stand to have when it comes to an epidemic. Don't trust scientists, hate government. Now we see why we are in the situation we're in.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
They didn't trust the scientists because of climate change and the oil companies and the Heartland and all these forces were really pushing Republicans to say, yeah, we need to keep oil. Oil is so good for us. And it was.
Coal.
So that coal, all of it. And they said, yeah, we're going to have to fight all these. And so they discredited science. Frankly, they did it. They backed the cigarettes. They discredited science. Yes, they did. Eventually, it gets there. So the Republican Party and their voters have been taught to see scientists as the enemy.
Healthy.
Yeah. Scientists can absolutely be wrong, but at the same time, not at this point. The Republican Party still denies climate change. The attorneys for Chevron, for example, have admitted in a court of law that climate change is real and have stipulated they're being sued. So even they admit that climate change is an issue. But they basically taught science is always bad, always. And then government is always bad. You can't trust the government. Actually, what was it? Reagan, one of the phrases he used to say is, the most terrifying words you'll ever hear. I'm here from the government. I'm here to help. And that was really their philosophy. And just like we're laughing, it resonated with people. Now we're at a place in which only the government can help. There are some things only the government can do. Only the government can police. Only the government can be the military. We have privatized these things. And so what do you do is when you're dwindling out, there's certain things like the CDC has to do its job. Correct. When we inherently distrust them, this is the result we get. And now we can actually retreat into our little media segment and say, geez, okay, I can now not believe the CDC is attacking the president that we love. They're lying.
Right.
You can actually live in a world and never have that view challenged.
Having said that, Don, the fact that the CDC is discredited, there's media segmentation. Most of our institutions have been, discredited. I don't want to use the word discredited for the FBI or for the CIA or anything like that, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. where do you think it stops? How do we, because I was thinking about how do we get it back? But now my question to you is more, do you think that this country can ever go into a democratic socialist model?
You mean more akin to like what they have in Europe? Yes.
Where social security, where you have healthcare for all, where Jeff Bezos is paying more taxes and he's not worth $14 trillion. I mean, who the hell? We're so out of whack, Don. I don't see. Tell me what you think, because I don't see.
Actually, I think it is much more likely, if not inevitable, that we're going to look a lot more like a European country, and probably sooner rather than later, for precisely the reasons that you've been bringing up. The Americans actually they think that the United States is income inequality actually looks like Sweden's, that the richest and the poorest are about this far apart, whereas we're this far apart in reality. And they actually want that. And Sweden is probably, I mean, other than communist China, is probably the most socialist country in the world. We actually want that. Many of the things we have are that they have are incredibly appealing to voters, particularly the blue collar voters. But it is precisely, the conversation is starting to shift. And one of the things that may be a watershed, gosh, we could do a whole segment on this one alone, it's wildly popular across the boards. And I say wildly popular across the boards, it is popular with the bottom 80% of Americans, as opposed to the top 20%, income-wise, are incredibly into having some sort of safety net medicine. Not necessarily a full Medicare, but catastrophic care. You know, if you're hospitalized, it's covered. Want a much more social.
My question to Don was, what is his opinion as far as people being willing to get there now? And can the system be changed? Because this is a huge ship to turn.
Well, it is and it isn't, because it actually can turn very quickly. You see in other countries around the world that it can shift very quickly. This is precisely, and I was saying before, why we continue to have a conversation based on race.
I was going to say what it's going to come back to is we keep talking about these issues along racial lines.
And the perception that when the conversation, what Reagan effectively did, he changed government help to government always helps them. And the them was defined as essentially not white people.
Correct.
And they were able to do that. So you find people who are incredibly, and that's where I think their biggest mistake has been, is it's always been tied to them. It's worked incredibly well for the last century or more. And that's how that's been split along those lines. But having said that, those who are actually voting for Republicans, there is a huge chunk that want the government to do more, that want Medicare to be expanded, that want better wages. They want them to actually tax corporations more for the benefit of society as a whole. So the trick is, they tell them you don't like socialism, and they go, yeah, we hate socialism, because they think it's free money for lazy people. And not lazy white people.
Not lazy white people. It's illegal criminals and lazy black people.
Yes. Well, they probably would say, yeah, we're not fond of giving money to lazy white people either. They actually do think that white people are more deserving, because they assume they're trying to get a job, and they assume those that are
They pull themselves up by the bootstraps.
all of those things.
Inherently a racial.
So what you have in the polling, it shows that there is a huge groundswell of support, but we're not having the conversation under that. It is an entire framing issue, and it's a media segmentation issue. And this is where I think so many of us get lost, is we go, I can't believe people aren't supportive of this. They are. And despite all of the rhetoric, they still have not convinced their own people to be against these things. When Obamacare is explained to Republicans without using the words Obamacare, it has a majority Republican support. But when you throw it in terms of socialism or that Obama designed it, the support collapses. What does that tell you? Remember,
Embarrassing to hear you say that.
But it's true.
It's true.
But it's just like, what, Jesus, what have we come to?
But we're able to have that conversation along those terms, and it comes back to the basic idea of media segmentation, so that you don't get it. Whether it is Facebook groups or the people that are, you still need some gatekeepers dominating the conversation. That's why talk radio, Fox News, Drudge Report, all kinds of conservative media outlets, they set a tone and they set a conversation, get people riled up about certain things. But if that conversation shifted ever so quickly to questions about healthcare, they know, because they don't bring those things up. And that's how that ecosphere, we need to have this conversation on these terms and these terms only. What surprises me is that the liberal side of the equation has not effectively been able to change that conversation, because there is still a fair amount of cross-pollination of information and ideas. The media segmentation has not completely split us so that we live in this world. It's curious to me that the liberal side of the equation has not found a way to appeal to that. But I think that they still do old school politics and appealing to pieces. So they're afraid to do it themselves.
I was going to say that basically it comes down to exactly what you said earlier. I learned a lot from this conversation, that political communication. They have not learned, or I don't know how to say it, no tiene cojones, to
I gave me ammo.
This, I also am hesitant because you're giving me hope, and I don't like hope. It breeds eternal sorrow. But it gives me hope when you say that there is, because I know this to be true. And I'm going to say this, for example, somebody who works in Colorado in the coal mines, or somebody who works as a truck driver, which is a good living. Okay, so the truck driver jobs, we know automation is coming. We know those jobs will be eliminated. It doesn't see race, much like the pandemic. It doesn't see race. One of the responses I got to that from my peers is, well, why not just not automate the trucks? I'm like, that's not how technology works. You don't stop technology. It just keeps coming. It's impossible, especially at the top. If something is cheaper, more cost effective, and also rebranded as safer, it's going to come and it's going to eliminate jobs. And same for fossil fuels. But the Republican Party, what the Republican Party has done is, anytime you try to have any of these conversations, if a Democrat comes with these like issues, like, you will be impacted, you will be affected, this does affect you. There has been this successful, for lack of a better term, brainwashing narrative or segmenting narrative where, well, my coal mining job wouldn't be taken away because climate change doesn't exist and scientists are false. So we don't believe in that. So my job shouldn't be eliminated. So I'm not even going to listen to your message, because this message is telling me what I want to hear, that my job is not going anywhere. So they're not even listening to, I would rather put you through school, get you a better job that's safer for you, safer for your health, will provide more security and provide you with health care, and it's better for the environment and it's better for society. Can't even listen to that conversation because you've already taken away the trust, like you said, in the scientists, and you've taken away the trust in the government, and you're not going to listen. And I don't know if the onus is on our Democratic politicians, or if there's no way to communicate effectively anymore with this happening.
I have a question. Sorry, I know you were going to answer, but just listening to Dasnet say everything she just said blows my mind, because you and I, Dasnet, I don't know. I apologize. I'm not sure, but you and I, Don, have traveled all over the world, and we've seen different cultures and different, political systems and stuff like that. And I guess I'm just, like I used to say to you, Dasnet, my mother had this saying, "Cáete de la mata," fall off that tree. Maybe I'm falling off that tree right now and saying, why are we so behind?
And
or am I crazy?
I think it goes back to exactly what he said about we speak along racial lines. It is, I'm going to say it, I'm going to call it like it is. It is easier to push something through in Sweden that is a social policy when everybody's white. There were studies that showed they're actually monitoring when the Syrian refugees were being taken into these countries, if these social policies, or would they become other? Would they be susceptible to the same trappings that we have here? Because as much as these other countries have been able to successfully put these things into place, America is also extremely different than any other country in the world. There is no country like our country as far as the immigration that we have taken in. We were were we not the last country to abolish slavery? The last one?
We're last or second to last after Brazil. It was Brazil or us.
I mean, think about the implications of that, right? So that's not an issue as much in the United Kingdom. They don't have that as much as they have that here. And I think what makes us so different, what makes us so behind, is we have the diversity, we have the other, and they have successfully, like Don said, used that for a century against us. We have other, and that's what makes us different, and that's what makes us fall behind, because we just keep falling more and more and more behind. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. However, looking at it, while our racial makeup and our influx of Hispanics has increased, during FDR, there was a huge sweep of socialist policies, and the United States became incredibly socialist. I even like to tease some of my friends who are very conservative, and I go, "You're still living in a socialist country because we have Social Security and Medicare. It's not for everyone, and we're not as much, but we have social welfare programs that
I do the same thing.
Everyone, we all get them when we get older, and there are other ones that are there. But it was absolutely going along those lines and becoming much more socialist in the sense of the willingness that we're all in it together. And that's what FDR had really brought to the fore. And that's where the country was culturally. They saw us all in it together. We were still racially divided then. We had those issues then. It's not that I don't think that the race has been effective. That's what the wealthy have actually been able to do, is divide and conquer. And that, I think, so that they can actually arrange society in a way that benefits themselves the most.
So you're saying that the wealthy have the wealthy are the ones that have divided and conquered to be able to control.
That really is
by race and things like that.
That is the one. In terms of what we're actually seeing, the level of income inequality that we're facing is actually more extreme today than it was during Downton Abbey, which was Britain at the turn of the century.
Right.
That the staff at Downton Abbey were doing better than some of the people at the bottom of the rungs today.
Correct.
And that's really where we're at in terms of the gap. Now, our standards of living due to technology are a bit better than they were. So that's where you're at. And the conversation is being had along those lines. Now, why is it that the Democratic Party has not been more effective in coming back to this? Well,
and you mean in coming back to the FDR days of Social Security, and where we were becoming more socialist?
in
Right?
countering today's arguments, why are they not more effective? Where are Democrats and Republicans about, I don't know, a centimeter apart? The stock market. When it comes to high finance, we're in complete agreement. The parties are in complete agreement. The people are not. They're in complete agreement that those people are not to be touched and that is more sacred than even Social Security. Because look, we've actually been through 2008 and now we've been in 2020. 2 massive stock market downturns. Dramatic. The one in 2008 was as severe as the Great Depression.
Yep.
Luckily, they acted as hard as they did at the time. Having said that, that was completely rescued. There was not even a debate.
They were aligned.
Completely. We as a people did not discuss it at all. There was some howling about maybe something for Main Street, maybe something. But both times the stock market was rescued. This last time in less than 6 months. The time before it took about a year and a half. And that's what they actually did. So the point is, the super rich are not going to be touched by either party. And that really is where you go, why haven't they hit back more forcefully? There must be something else at play. Do I know this to be so? No, but it is a pretty good explanation in my opinion.
Well, I don't think if that were widely known, the base would take it very well. Because a lot of people in the Democratic Party want to know, why can you rescue big banks, but you can't rescue us?
Right.
Why are you aligned with the Republican Party on that? So if they are able to align on that and outwardly say they would lose a lot of their argument, because I think a lot of unfortunately what they built around their campaigns is that look how much money they have up there. It would almost be admitting that they agree, and they would have to restructure that conversation and that narrative. And I think they would lose a lot of support, because what you just told me, I did not know that. And
I didn't get it either until now. In Biden 2020, he said, he's made it perfectly clear, anybody making less than $400,000 a year will not be taxed. Which leads me to assume, get ready, Jeff Bezos.
Right, exactly.
When you actually look at what the Obama administration did, I was there, 2 main things will stand out. One, only one person in the entire banking industry was jailed, despite all of the malfeasance that went on up to 2008. The second thing is only those people making at least 7 figures annually were going to get taxed. So they were going after people who have incomes of $1 million or more.
That was Bush, or was that Obama? Because
no, when they put in Obamacare, they put in a wealth tax on the super wealthy, and so they basically hit the very top with that. So they did hit those things, and it is appealing. But what they didn't do is they didn't go after the corporations, and they didn't go after. So they went after a very tiny sliver, but not very hard. It actually was, frankly, a little love tap compared to what they had seen in the past. It did raise a lot of money. It did pay for Obamacare. But when you actually see what is going on generally, I mean, even Hillary Clinton had an enormous amount of donations from Goldman Sachs, for example. Both parties actually get a lot of money from high finance. And that is one of the ways that we, quote, don't touch them. That was one of the, you see these agreements going all the time. The way that they actually got, the only way they could get Obamacare through was they promised not to touch drug prices. That's why drug prices were still so high, is because they knew they could take on the medical community, but not the medical community and the pharmaceutical community. Because if both of them gun for them, they'd be toast.
So when we look at the AOCs and the squad, I'm sure you know who the squad is.
Yeah.
Coming on, I want more of them. I think we're at that point. But it seems like such a I don't know what the expression is. There's an expression where you can't touch, don't touch the burner, you'll get burnt or something like that. It seems like such a hot issue that because they're socialists and they're, whatever. But I almost feel like that's the direction we need to go in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it actually is going to. I think that, one of the things they do always say, which is probably fair, the pendulum always swings. And the question is, we saw how far to the left we could get. It was about 1980. And now we're going to find out how far to the right we would get. Some people thought it was the year 2000. Maybe it's the year 2020. We don't really know.
Far to the right or far to the left? I think
how far to the right. I'm saying now, because we're in 2020 and we're pretty far to the right. Are we as far as we can go? We won't really know until it's over.
Don't you feel that they've like destroyed themselves at this point?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Everybody, as far as political watchers, they have hollowed out their support. And what we're actually seeing, they believe there is going to be a miracle in Trump. And they believe that people are lying to the pollsters because they don't want to admit, because they're ridiculed in the media for supporting Trump. And frankly, I think a lot of it is they're not very proud of their own behavior, because so often there's just screaming and just really awful behavior at these rallies and these things. They don't look all that scared to admit that they love him,
No.
to me. But I think that they're finally running out of things to appeal to, and they're turning off people. I think what first turned them on to Trump was he was daring to say things that they wanted said. Now he said way too many things they didn't want said.
Right.
And so now they've turned off a lot of people. And that is unfortunately the trouble with truth in politics from the left or the right, is if you keep saying what you believe often enough and loud enough, you're going to eventually alienate people. That's why all the other Republicans were scared to say too much on that stage with Trump. But that's why he beat them. They knew something he didn't, but he was a breath of fresh air. And they gave him some space when they weren't so keen on some stuff.
So now it's time to, first of all, I want to thank you for giving us the time, but now I really want to put you on the spot.
Okay.
The only question I have is, only is going to be 5. As far as the outcome of the election, gerrymandering, are we going to overcome that? Where do you think the election is going to come down to?
She's asking all my questions.
Yeah.
Well, here,
Excellent.
you know what? I will answer them briefly and succinctly, and that's so not me. Gerrymandering. Because the census is coming up this time, and because of the down ballot races that we're actually seeing across the country, whoever gets elected in November in the state houses is going to redraw the districts this time. And gerrymandering is probably going to go radically to the left. We're already seeing what is likely to be happening in Texas and Georgia. But even so, the momentum on the left is we are overcoming gerrymandering. We have already regained the House, which is the only place gerrymandering actually works at the federal level. And we have already overcome that. We're looking at, so that's why they're terribly afraid of a tsunami, is if the Democrats are this fired up this year, what you're going to see in the elections in November, state houses may flip. Governors are probably going to flip. That's going to be looking at a totally different districting for Congress, which means that you're going to have a squad. You're going to have 10 squads. That kind of thing is probably coming up.
That was my question. That was part of my final questions to you. How do you see this playing out? Take me to November 3rd. And then I want to go into your head for the 3 months after.
Okay. So my take on where we are now is we are probably going to see a tsunami for the blue side.
That is a big statement because we've heard that before.
Yes, the words
It's
that
terrifying, but I feel it as well. I'm
Senator-
feeling it as well.
Senator Ted Cruz actually said it this last week. He referred to it as a Watergate-level bloodbath. Now, he's seeing internal polling that we're not seeing. This is why they're no longer beginning to hide the panic. There's a chance that they're going to actually flip not one, but both Senate seats from red to blue in Georgia.
That's huge.
That is huge.
It's kind of a long stretch, but they see that as possible. That's how bad it is out there for them. So that's where we're looking at your down ballot races. That's what we're looking at on a nationwide scale. Trump is probably going to lose, and is probably going to lose by a staggering margin. It will, when the map goes up, it'll still look half red, half blue, but the electoral college victory is probably going to be lopsided, somewhere to the tune of 320, 180. It could be as bad as 350, 150.
Just really quickly, I want to put my crystal ball here to work. I'm going to give you 3 states and I want you to tell me where you think they're going to go.
Okay.
1, Florida.
Biden.
Really? Why?
Because just in the last,
Because we live here, even though you don't believe us.
how
I used to
bad?
live there.
Okay. Specifically, Democrats are ahead about 100,000 votes in early voting for requested ballots. That's number one. Number two, in the last week since the COVID diagnosis and the insanity that had post debate, seniors nationally have moved 10 points
They're
for
pissed.
10 points against Trump. You actually see in one of the other ones that is very surprising is the Villages here in Florida. Google it. CNN just refers to the Villages. It's so well known. It's such a bastard. They actually had a Biden golf cart parade.
Wow.
They were not even. Those people took out their Democratic signs last time. They have literally been shamed over the last 4 years. There is a groundswell of attention that is going across the board for him. So I feel quite confident about Florida. If he can't win Florida, he can't win. Is it possible? This state has been crazy every single election of my life. Why on earth would we not surprise again?
And leaving these the last minute.
Yeah. What's the other state?
I'm going to break that down a little bit. Where do you think Miami-Dade will go?
Miami-Dade has actually stayed strong Democrat.
We always go the same way. We always go Democrat.
It's always blue. It's just whether or not it's going to be overwhelmingly so. I think they're actually going to lose counties that they used to have.
How about
Polk? Polk County is still going to go red. But what's happening across the board is they're actually losing, or they're not winning by big margins.
Okay.
In the red counties. And that is what you're going to see. There's still a majority. It's just not as strong a majority. Okay. And that is what's likely to happen in Florida.
And Texas?
Ooh, Texas is very interesting.
So interesting.
A friend of mine actually said the way you actually look at this is you see how often the candidate visits and how much money they're spending there, how much advertising. So when we look at states like Texas or Georgia, for example, Biden has not been there yet. And he's spent some money there. He's just in the last week committed a lot more money there. And his wife is traveling to Texas this week. They're still actually gaming out whether or not it is. Texas and Georgia are considered complete toss-ups. Most people do not believe that to be real because it's just magical thinking that a Democrat could win Texas. It's not. there's a tsunami building right now. And when you have momentum, really strange things happen. Winning Texas would be really strange. This may happen. I'm
Here's-
hopeful, but not ready to call it.
I think what I noticed, I ran some analytics because so many people left New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, specifically to Texas and Florida, to flee the pandemic because of the cost of living, and there's space, acreage to get out. So on top of, and Georgia too. So on top of these states already being a toss-up, now taking an influx of basically migration of people who already vote blue, who registered in time, and who could have now be voting in like these new states. Texas was already kind of funny with, was it Beto O'Rourke? That was super interesting. They've had people move from California to Texas, have been moving. They've been leaving San Francisco to go to Austin. There's a lot of migration there. And then with the immigration reform, I think Texas will be really interesting. I can see it going. And then Georgia with the, I'm sorry, what was her name?
Stacey
Abrams. So Stacey Abrams basically won that election in Georgia. Like, that's crazy. Not too long ago. And times have changed since then. So, and I think that the changes that you're seeing there in Georgia, that'd be really interesting. I feel like I'm betting on football. All right. The last one for you is, let me think. I want to pick carefully. Ohio.
Ooh, Ohio.
Where Ohio goes.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio is still looking strongly in the Trump camp. But I'm going to say it's going to be like Texas. It is literally a toss-up at this point.
Ohio had a huge legal federal judge decision yesterday in Ohio. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Don.
Yeah,
they had removed. They did in Ohio what the governor did in Texas, which was to remove all of the boxes, the ballot boxes, drop-off boxes, and they only left one per county. And a federal judge ruled last night that Ohio has to put the drop boxes back along with Texas. So I don't know if that changes anything there, but you were saying Ohio seems very red.
It seems very red, but at the same time, I think it's going to be a toss-up, frankly, and it shouldn't have been, because Trump has remained overwhelmingly popular there as a whole, much like we've sort of seen or expected in Florida. Forgive me, I know we've gone long, and I want to digress for a moment and tell you guys a little bit of a story. And this is the thing that we're probably looking at that makes predictions so hard to make. And the story is, my father was a county judge in a small rural county here in North Florida. And his third election was hotly contested. And it was essentially just a very country story. We were a big family that was well known in town, and somebody ran against him from another big family well known in town. And so it got the whole town all basically worked up over the fact that this was an exciting election. Now, it got to be so heated that there were people who had not voted in 20 years who came out to vote for one of these two men as judge.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of the story is, this unfortunately led to a major Florida Department of Law Enforcement investigation in which my father won, the other side lost, by 41 votes.
Oh my.
In a county of 10,000. It was that tight. But what happened was the FDLE came in, and the guy who ran for judge was disbarred. They caught him. They had dead people absentee voting. And when I say people hadn't come out in 20 years because they got that fired up, this is what we're looking at right now. There's a level of fired up. And when you start talking about states like Georgia, Ohio, Florida, Texas, one of the old jokes in the Deep South, and I know Ohio isn't, but in more rural areas. So how much did you get the dead vote by? How many did you win? And by that, what they actually
Jesus.
do is they request absentee ballots and they do forge them and submit them from people who haven't voted in a long time and will never challenge it. But in a hot election, a whole bunch of people showed up and they said, I'm sorry, we've already got your absentee ballot. And they said, what do you mean? I did an absentee ballot.
Holy smokes.
And they said, we have the record here at the Department of Elections that you actually requested and we already have your ballot. He goes, well, I'm here to swear out that ain't my ballot. And then that's when the FDLE got involved. And you'll find the FBI. We could be seeing a lot of that going on. If people, we already saw in the last time in North Carolina,
Yes.
a fella actually had stuffed about, he had actually collected a lot of ballots that went.
Yes, and he had paid
went
people
missing.
to go pick up ballots at people's homes. And
Well, they've stirred up a lot that the Democrats don't have a history of doing this. I think that they're just too goody-goody generally, and Republicans are more, it's all about winning.
but what
And-
happens if, along those lines, what happens if the obviously we have mail-in ballots. Help me out here.
Mhm.
We have mail-in ballots. We have vote by mail or whatever the hell, absentee, which Trump has talked about. And then we have, you go and you vote at the machine the day of the election. What if, because I went to the Board of Elections and dropped off my mail-in. You saw the photograph of my family. Everybody in my family did it. They took their mail-in vote, a mail-in ballot, and they dropped it off at the Board of Elections. You saw those pictures. So they said that the count, they do a count every night, but or a tally, they used specific words. They do a tally every night, but the tally doesn't dump. It's not, they cannot dump it until election day.
Yeah.
So the computers are already counting the ballots. They're holding in whatever system.
Mhm.
And then on the 3rd at midnight, everything goes whoop, and it drops into the system. So then those numbers come out in public. If, here's my long-winded point, if Trump has this blue tsunami on November 3rd, forget the absentees and the votes and the whatever, all the talking about, but if he has this blue tsunami on November 3rd, do you think that will change anything for him, or will he continue to scream bloody murder? Because on November 3rd, how are you going to argue with the machines?
No, you would ask me, what do I think is going to happen on November 3rd? I think that it's going to be a heavy Democratic win. It's not going to be close. I think it's going to be rather decisive that night. I don't think there's going to be enough electoral college votes on the table left to win. And that while he may not concede, I'm pretty sure Biden will declare victory, and he will leave timely. I don't think that he will actually attempt to stay or any of this dramatic having to remove him.
What makes you feel so confident when you say that? I can hear the confidence in your voice.
Because he will be completely and utterly alone. There will not be a single Republican that will support him staying, even after losing.
Okay,
I
but
think
Trump
that-
doesn't lose. That's why I was thinking Trump doesn't lose.
I don't think he'll be able to actually wrap his head around it, but I think he will leave kind of like you leave a party. You just, it's time to go, and you just leave, even if you leave in shame.
I hope you're
going.
right. I hope you're right, because those 3 months, which I was asking you about, the 3 months after November the 3rd, is when I picture, how do I say this gently? I won't. The KKK cavalry will be on its way to Washington to surround the White House and protect the president.
Well, it's exciting, and I think that the drama. I think the media actually like playing up the idea he's just not even willing to leave. If the blue tsunami is accurate in its prediction, I want you to think about how utterly demoralizing that is. And when we go back to the question of media segmentation, it is going to be such a shock and such a horror. It's probably going to make what we liberals felt after Hillary lost seem tame. They still believe that the media are conspiring to give them fake polls to make him look weak and to make it all look bad. If this actually is a tsunami, it's going to be a crushing, not an angering thing. If he lost by a hair's breadth, that would be angering. Crushing is demoralizing. And that's one of the things that happens. So I do think the right actually will probably feel. Now, if it is not a crushing blow, everything I'm saying is kind of open. But everything points to nobody, if you think in elections, nobody like Ted Cruz goes on television and says, this could be a bloodbath. They don't say that about their own side.
Right.
That means that they're actually, what they're seeing on the inside are things like, holy crud, we could lose Texas. Holy crud, we could lose Georgia.
I just hope Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham go.
Those are, well, Mitch McConnell is almost certainly going to win, but Lindsey Graham is literally on his way out. It will be a surprise if he holds on to it at this point.
And what about if this Supreme Court nominee is confirmed? Is there anything they could do to challenge any result?
Actually, there isn't. If the confirmation process
Great question.
is complete, they cannot challenge the results. The only way you can remove someone is who's has a lifetime federal appointment, a federal judge, is impeachment. Now, it's happened a handful of times, and federal judges have been removed in the history of our country. Do not believe ever a Supreme Court justice. It was usually, they had broken the law or done something really horrible, and usually they resigned.
Or Kevin was totally nice and not a criminal at all. But I did want the answer to that question, but I was specifically saying challenging. So there was maybe if you could take me back a little bit, just quickly, succinctly, as we said, George Bush in Florida was overturned, those election results. That was like a debacle in Florida. You guys made a mess. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, right? And when during the Al Gore run, and the Supreme Court did have to step in, or was it the Florida Supreme Court that had to step in for the election?
Well, the United States Supreme Court actually, the Florida Supreme Court stepped in and
gave it to Gore.
Right.
Well, they allowed counting to continue and had that one. And then the U.S. Supreme Court stepped in and said, no, we're not having any more of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so they ended it, and they did that. In terms of this time, I actually think that with the level of energy that there is in the country, they would be strongly risking rioting. I think that what we have seen over the summer would be tame.
What are we going to do? What are we going to do with a stacked court? I mean, there is precedent. There is precedent to put up to 13 justices on the court, but if something doesn't change, we're screwed for generations, don't you think?
Well, it depends. There are a lot of things. There's so many moving parts in that question. When you get into the court, historically, some of the most liberal Supreme Court justices have been nominated by Republicans.
Yes,
because they end up, when they get on the bench, they precisely what we're already starting to see with Roberts.
Justice Kennedy.
And you see Chief Justice Roberts is not towing the line. He's like, you can't really touch me now. I'm going to do my conscience, and you people can say whatever you want about me, but I'm going to do what I think's right.
I've also been told that if they mess with Roe, the president can just rewrite policy, or he can rewrite something?
We could actually pass federal legislation. Now, the problem with whenever you pass a law as opposed to a constitutional amendment, it's much harder to overturn those sort of things. And that's precisely why the strategy had been that way. But once again, this is something that when you look at the politics of these things, there is a reason why the Republicans have only been marginally successful around the edges with abortion. And it isn't because the Democrats have been so effective.
It's interesting.
It's because they raise a lot of money from people. There's a reason why gay rights took a long time. Because Democrats raised a lot of money from gays and lesbians. When the issue goes away, so does the money and so do the votes. So that has always been a dynamic that you have to keep in mind. And so as politics move along, that's an aspect. The Republicans, if you look, since evangelicals 40 years ago, they came of age and got active with Reagan for the first time in 1980. They have been remarkably unsuccessful with virtually their entire agenda. There have been lots of nominal wins that have flooded the pages of newspapers over those last 40 years. But if you look at the top line things they want, gay people are getting married and abortion is still legal. They've lost every meaningful thing that they wanted. Why? Because the Republicans wanted their votes and their money more than they wanted their wins.
And on that note,
Wait, I had my last question. It's off topic, but I want to say it later. He said about voting, the third-party systems. We talked about that. What about different methods of voting? Do you have any thoughts and opinions about like ranked voting or other systems of like voting that might be more effective here?
Oh gosh, ranked choice voting. What actually happens is you have what's called an open primary. So you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican, an independent or anything. And anybody who wants to run, it can be 2 people or 200 people can run for, say, Senator of Florida. And what happens is in the primary, you can be anything and everything, including green. If you get 50% plus 1 vote, you win in the primary and you're now the senator. Full stop. What then happens next is you actually have the top 2 vote on. And then you can actually rank choices in which you say, well, if mine doesn't get the majority, then you can actually have, because that's another level where they don't go to the primary and you have all those 200 people running. Well, if my choice doesn't get it, here's my second choice and my third choice. And then you only count that vote as long as your first choice doesn't get it.
I have never heard of that in my life. That's so interesting. Thank you for explaining that.
Some people, I believe the thinking is behind that's how we would actually get a third party or fourth party system to actually work here is by implementing that kind of voting, because then you have multiple choices. We're able to do that. For example, Robert, when we were having that conversation about third party voting and throwing away your vote, where that person who said that, they could put in that person as their first choice. But if that first person doesn't get it, then hey, they can still put Joe Biden as second. That is the thinking or argument, I think, for wanting it, as I understand it. And that's it for me.
Dawn, I cannot thank you enough for spending so much time with us. I mean, you've always been a fountain of information, and I'm so grateful that I've been able to get this on tape, to get you on tape.
Chop it at something, make something.
And I hope that we'll be able to get you back maybe after the election so we can talk a little bit about your opinions and stuff like that.
Well, provided we don't have riots, sure.
If the internet still exists.
Anything.
You two will be in trouble. I'll be in the middle of nowhere.
On that note, Dawn Diaz-Johnson, thank you so much for joining us at Latinx Rising. Come and see us when you get a chance. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
make sure that you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification button.
so you can see our videos every single week. Thank you for your support.
We really encourage respectful and powerful discussions about these topics that hopefully interest you as well. Please leave your comments below or follow us on social media.